Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to officially get started. So just to restate, the session is on accommodations, and you're hanging out with the diabetes link tonight. For those of you that are new to this organization or don't know who the diabetes link is, you may know us at the College Diabetes Network up until the end of last year. We are the only nationwide nonprofit organization that supports young adults living with diabetes, full stop. This age group, this is what we focus on. This is what we do all day, every day. All of our staff and our team are united around providing support, education, resources, opportunity for people with diabetes when they're in the young adult transition stage. We used to be known as College Diabetes Network. And so obviously part of what we're connecting on tonight and what we do is still a big part of our mission. But we also have learned, COVID times, or just like kind of society as it's grown, that not every young adult goes to college, right? Not every young adult has the opportunity to go to college. It's expensive. It's stressful. Not every young adult wants to go to college. There are a lot of number of opportunities, and all young adults deserve support and resources regardless of that experience. So while our focus today is about accommodations in the campus and college setting, know that we are here for your young adult in college and beyond, and in any number of, their like transition to young adult experiences. Before I turn things over to our speakers and we just get started, I just want to reiterate the chat's open. So if you've got questions that bubble up as we're talking, please drop them into the chat. We'll try to have some time at the end to answer some of your questions. And yeah, that sounds great. Also keep letting us know like where you're at, how it relates, back to where you are in your journey. I do want to just take a second to introduce myself. And then ask the speakers to introduce themselves. I am Diane. A lot of you have probably received some emails from me, or you might see me in our parent caregiver Facebook group. I am the director of programs here at the Link. I am the resident parent perspective. So like a lot of parents and caregivers on this call, I have a teenager with type 1 diabetes. I also have a young adult that is heading to college in 2 weeks as well. They're different. My child with type 1 diabetes is in high school, but I am fully living what a lot of you are living right now, with like packing supplies and all of the normal college transition kind of experiences. We've got the stack of stuff by the front door at my house too. So I definitely get that from the caregiver perspective. But you're not really here to hear from me. I will share my email with you at the end. But we're really here for you to get to connect with each of our 4 speakers and panelists that we have with us. And I'm so thrilled that they are able to join us and that they are willing to share their personal experiences along the way. They represent, they're at different places in their life, in college, post-college. And so I think you'll get a really robust representation of what it's been like for these 4 individuals. Okay, so without further ado, I'm just going to toss it to each of you to give a quick intro of yourselves, like before we jump into questions. And Jenna, I'm going to ask you to start us off.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna. I've been living with type 1 diabetes for 13 years, and I got involved originally with the Diabetes Link back when it was the College Diabetes Network at the University of Maryland, where I led a chapter. And I have used accommodations all throughout high school, college, and I'm about to start graduate school in 2 weeks, and I just got myself set up with accommodations here for graduate school. So yeah, I'm excited to share my experience with all of you today.
Thanks, Jenna. I'm excited about that too. Ella, you're up next.
Okay, I am Ella Berkler. I am going to Wake Forest University, where I am a senior. I got involved with TDL when it was the College Diabetes Network. I started as a member of my chapter, then I was a secretary, and I've been the president now for 2 years of my chapter. And we are heavily involved in my chapter specifically with the accommodations process. We send out like messages to all of our incoming diabetic freshmen who have registered for accommodations. And so we're very involved in that process. And I also myself have accommodations, which I did not have in high school. So I had to do that, like the transition from not having accommodations to having to like deal with getting accommodations when I came in 3 years ago to Lake.
That's a really important lens. And I'm so grateful that you're here to share that, both from your personal experience and how you're, navigating that as a group and supporting on your campus community for sure. Nazine.
Hi, I'm Nazine, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes for 10 years now and have had accommodations since the start. I am currently a junior and the president of Fordham University's Diabetes Link. So thank you for having me, and I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks so much. Fun fact, I got to meet Nazine in person the end of last year. So I'm really excited for us to get to work together again here today. And last but certainly not least, Belle, if you'd like to do a quick introduction of yourself.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Belle Wood, and I've had type 1 diabetes for over 12 years. I'm an undergraduate senior at Oklahoma State University, a university studies major, and after I graduate this upcoming spring, I'll be applying for a master's program at OSU, Education and Leadership Studies with a concentration in college student development. I want to work in higher education, focusing on disability, probably either in a disability services office somewhere or somewhere else in student affairs. Interesting, I'm not a part of a Diabetes Link chapter because the entire state of Oklahoma does not have one yet. Instead, I'm actually a president of an up-and-coming student organization focused on students with disabilities as a whole.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Belle, for joining us. And again, parents and guests, I hope that you'll agree with me. My particular excitement about this panel that we have with you today is just the variety of experiences, connections to our organization and their own lived experiences. Because as we know, diabetes is individual, it's personal. Every school is different and unique. And so how I want to just kick off this conversation is that there is no one formula. Just like there isn't for your own personal diabetes management, there's no one formula for the right list of the right accommodations or the wrong accommodations, or what your school has to do or should do or shouldn't do. It's individual to each student. But we are here to help and give you some recommendations and suggestions and some tips from along the way. So we're going to jump right in. The first topic that we want to talk about, that we kind of identified when we've met internally and from some other young adults, we've heard from, is the concept of identity, and in particular, diabetes identifying as having a disability or diabetes being considered a disability. We recognize, we've certainly heard here at the organization that many young adults, many people in general with diabetes don't identify as someone with a disability. And that's fair. You do you. We are all in control of our own identity. But regardless of how you feel and perhaps identify, your rights to accommodations as guaranteed by the Americans with Disabilities Act does mean that all colleges and universities who receive federal funding must provide reasonable accommodations. Again, just sending home that this can mean a wide range of things because every college and every person is different. But ultimately, the purpose of registering for accommodations is so that you have every possible tool and support system available to you if and when your student needs them. So just wanted to touch on that identity piece briefly. And for our panel, what I'd like to ask you to reflect on is, for your own personal identity and your own experience, why did you choose to register for accommodations? And as a follow-up to that, when did you make that choice? Who helped you make that? Just where you were in your journey. When did you identify, yep, hey, this is something that I want to do, need to do? And Jenna, I'm going to kick it back to you to start.
Yeah, so I think that from my perspective, we do have a bit more responsibility, at least with regards to our health, because we live with type 1. And because, part of my brain power has to be going to taking care of myself. I want to make sure that I'm supported and doing my best academically, because I know we put a lot of time into studying for these exams and doing these assignments. And, the last thing that I would want is for that to be impacted or my performance be impacted by a higher or low blood sugar. So it's just really important for me to have accommodations in place so that I can both perform well academically and take care of my body. And for me, it was my mom. She was super on top of it. I'm super grateful. She, in March, once I decided which school to go to, she just got the ball rolling on getting accommodations set in place for me. And then from seeing her do that, I was able to do it for myself in graduate school. And I think we're going to touch on this later, so I won't go into too much detail, but doing it early is super important.
That's great. I appreciate the teaser for a little bit later conversation. Ella, what about you? Why did you choose? When did you make that choice? Who helped you make that?
So I also made the choice very early when I found out that I was going to be going to Wake Forest. I started the process of getting what was needed from different people to get my accommodations. But I do think that this is a great topic because we talk about this a lot in my club in particular, because we do have people that decide not to do accommodations right away. And there's this like fear that once you've decided that you're not doing it, you can't change your mind, which you absolutely can change your mind, that you do in fact want to get accommodations and start that process. But for myself, I just knew that it would be best for me if I had the proper tools to ensure that I had the most successful academic life that I could. And that meant that I had to pay attention to my diabetes and how it would impact the way that I could go to my classes, if I could go to my classes, if I had to leave, and just ensure that everything was recorded and written down to make sure there were no misunderstandings between any professors about like, why are you leaving class?
That's great. I really love the idea of like, it's like tucking something into your back pocket, having it if you need it. Doesn't mean you have to, but you've got it. It's just a tool to help support. So you can focus on all the other things that you actually really want to focus on when you're in college or need to. Nazine, what about you?
So I chose to register for accommodations in college because I've always had them since elementary school, and it really is a lifesaver. I once tried to fight the diabetes isn't a disability claim, but I soon realized that in high school, having accommodations is almost like empowerment because it shows that you have the right and power to achieve greatness. And I realized that college comes with many stressful factors that are not present in high school. So my parents, endocrinologists, my friends all supported me and wanted me to succeed socially and academically. So accommodations was the answer. And I'd say that my dad was my biggest inspirer just because he's in the medical field, so he gets the diabetes, and he's also a teacher, so he gets the stress. But yeah, so college is a great opportunity to form a community for support. And yeah, the diabetes link was that support for me. So very grateful.
We're thrilled. We'll talk about support a little bit later as well, like additional support that's needed besides just setting yourself up with accommodations. Belle, for you, why did you choose to register them? When did you know that you needed to? Who helped you make that decision?
I'm always last, aren't I? And if I'm out the way you do alphabetically, I'm either always first, always last.
That's fair. So sorry.
It's okay. I think one of the things that kind of separates my experience from my fellow panelists is that I actually don't just live with type 1. I have 2 other disabilities that I live with, an eye disability and a foot disability that impacts the length of time and distance I can stand and walk, for which I use a mobility scooter to get around campus. So it really wasn't a question of if or should I register for accommodations because I have multiple disabilities that impact my college experience.
That's a great lens. And what I want to comment on that I heard from all of you is that at least in your 4 experiences, it wasn't necessarily a question of should I? It was, I know that this is what I need to do to support myself, and just a matter of functionally doing so. Which leads me to kind of like a follow-up question or the next question related to this. How to do it, how to start that process. What are those first steps? What did you do first? We know, and I'm sure everyone that's like listening, is very well aware that prepping for college requires a lot of checklists, a lot of to-dos. There's a lot of things like T's to cross and I's to dot. It can be very overwhelming. And it can be very easy to like set aside the accommodations process as something like you'll get to after this other stuff is taken care of, maybe first. Like you got to pay for it. You've got to get your classes. So far, our panel, following up on like that you all knew that this is something that you needed to take care of. For you, when did you or when would you recommend that someone first contact like the Office of Disability Services or whatever it's called at your campus? And do you have any like quick notes on what that process was like for you? What maybe documentation that you needed, a letter from your endo, etc. And we're gonna just keep going in the same order just because that works for my brain. Jenna, if you'll kick us off.
Yeah, for sure. So I, from seeing how it was in college, I know the process can take a while. I did meet some people who didn't do the accommodations until later on, and then they didn't have them for their first semester. So I think that like my mindset with accommodations, just make it the first thing you do. Once you choose a school, accommodations, it's just the first thing to get out of the way. And that way, because it does take like, in my experience, at least a month for these offices to review your file. It can probably take longer depending on where you go and how busy they are. So I really just highly recommend and want to stress that it's just good to get done. I always needed a letter from my endo, and they then asked me some questions about like what they thought I needed. And then after they reviewed all of that, I always met with someone from the disability office and we kind of go over what I think I need, what they think I need. And we always pretty much matched up on that. I've had really positive experiences working with these offices. So yeah, that's my little 2 cents.
That's great. Ella, do you have any other differences, things to add, agree, concur? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I also not only have academic accommodations, but housing accommodations because I have a diabetic alert dog, which I know not everybody with diabetes has an alert dog and also doesn't do housing accommodations. But at my school, that's an every year resubmitting. So every year I have to go and get a letter from my endo and get specific forms filled out. So that's just what I have to add. But for accommodations, academic accommodations in general, that was just at the start of my college career.
That's great. And I appreciate you mentioning some of the different accommodations. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on too, like housing versus classes versus, there are different things. I know that's going to be a hot question. Nazine, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. You should definitely submit it early. For me, I submitted it in September, kind of in the middle of that month, and it took a few weeks to process. So I had a couple of classes I was taking and I did not get accommodations for certain quizzes, exams. So I believe that my 504 plan would be enough, but it wasn't. So instead, you need a new letter from your endo, maybe even every year, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, ask your endo early, give them some time, be respectful. And yeah, it was a pretty simple process for me. In terms of submitting it a little late, I think you can also talk with your professors. I'm sure they're understanding and they will understand that, it takes time. So hopefully it'll work out.
That's great. I have a thought to add, but I'm not going to do so until Belle, just in case you answer it first. Any recommendations or like memories on your part? When did you first reach out? What was that process like? What kind of documentation would you suggest that someone make sure they have lined up, et cetera?
So I actually transferred to Oklahoma State from a local community college. I think I reached out to OSU's accessibility services around March, April of the year I transferred. And I had my intake meeting around June. For diabetes documentation, like everyone else, I had a letter from my endo that detailed some of the things she thought I would need access to, like bathroom access for both housing and classroom, refrigerator, access to blood sugar meter, and food and drink in class. I don't know if this was actually used, but I also submitted a copy of my accommodation letter from the previous community college. That said, universities, I believe, don't have to carry over accommodations that a different institution approved previously. They'll have their own way of doing things that may differ from each other.
That was a great segue, and you did kind of read my mind. Part of what I was going to add is the theme here is communication, 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 early, often, and just sharing some of, what we've heard over the years. And, as you already know, in managing diabetes is you can't be too prepared. You can't have too much information or too many backup supplies packed. So things like prior accommodations, your an IEP if you have one, 504 documentation, previous school orders, all those things are great to have and share and potentially submit as like examples of what you maybe previously needed or had previously worked for you, for your student. And echoing what Belle said, like it's not a copy and paste. It's not a requirement of like, this is what I had, because obviously college is a different experience. But anything that you can collect or just kind of have ready to kind of, bolster your submission is definitely recommended. On that note, college accommodations are different than elementary school or, K through 12, or maybe things that your student or you needed, up until this point. There's probably many people who did have a 5-0 plan or some kind of accommodation set in high school. There's also, as we've heard from our panel, some people who did not. But one of the really important things, if I could hammer one thing home to everyone that's listening, is that at the college level, college accommodations must be requested by the student. I'm going to say that again. College accommodation services, the student must request services, and your college will work directly with you, the student. Parents are there to help and support, get them that documentation, review with them, but really, whereas like in previous schools, I know I, as the parent, I'm the one, who sets up those meetings and suggests things. This is one of the many times, but the first of many times that your student or your young adult is going to take the reins. On that note, like just while we're talking about the differences, I think for, the 4 of you on the panel, from your personal experience, what was a major difference or maybe a new and different accommodation that was really important that you learned to like add at the college level, or maybe that you wish you had added and you went back and revisited, that's different than what you needed in high school? And the obvious one is going to be housing accommodation. So I'm happy for you guys to talk about that. But if there's anything in like classroom, registering for classes early, any of that kind of stuff that is helpful, like there's more specific to the college level, that'd be great for our audience to hear and kind of start thinking about. I would love for you to share if you've got like a memory of a specific college related accommodation. In our order, Jenna, let you kick it off.
Yeah, so I had a bit of a unique experience in high school because I was homeschooled. So everything was already quite personalized. And yeah, I don't think I have a ton to add about that. I will say that in college, I did have the early registration accommodation, which I think was very helpful because it was important that I didn't have to run to class from class to class. I mean, that's just something that I didn't even think about that. My accommodation advisor was amazing and actually suggested that. But it's really important because you don't want to be in a situation where you're low and you have to run across campus in 10 minutes. And then, of course, you wouldn't be able to do that and you miss a class and you just don't want to get in that sort of situation. So, but I'll let everyone else address more the high school versus college.
I think the priority registration is a great call out for everybody. I know we see it a lot. I see it a lot talked about in like the parent kind of Facebook group that we have at the diabetes link, or just talking to other parents. That idea of like, yeah, being able to schedule classes that work for you, that aren't back to back, that aren't like you've got to get up and get to class before you can have breakfast or bolus or allow your food and insulin to work, like have a stable start to your day so you don't start the day like already behind. That's a really, really important and helpful one we've heard for sure. So I'm thrilled that like your accommodations advisor suggested and recommended that. That's great. Ella, what about you? What would you recommend? What's different? I know you work on this a lot with incoming students and your club at Wake Forest. So what do you see either from your experience or some of the common ones?
I think that like obviously the big accommodations are great and a lot of people have already had those coming in, but it's like the little accommodations, like you can get water whenever you need to, you can go to the bathroom whenever you need to. Some of those things, especially during COVID, weren't allowed in classrooms. So, and some schools haven't like reversed their, and some schools or professors haven't reversed their like classroom policies of like no eating and no drinking. So those are definitely the two that were really good that I like remind all of my incoming freshmen that that is something that they need to ask for, because it's the little ones that you often overlook. And I didn't have accommodations in high school, so I'm afraid that is all I have to offer.
Nope, that's great. That's why we're here talking about it. Everyone has a different experience. Nazine, what about yourself?
The biggest difference I would say is the level of independence. And I know we talk about it often, but you honestly cannot prepare yourself for the change. In high school, my high school specifically, we had the school nurse and the teachers kind of form a relationship where they talked about the exams coming up. So there were a few other diabetics in my school. So it would be like less on us and more on them. But when I arrived at college, I learned that one, I need to speak with every professor one-on-one before I even submit the request. That was something different. And two, that I'm not sure if this is aligning with other colleges, but for my college at Fordham, you have to submit a request for an alternate space for testing for every single quiz and exam. So in college, when you're overwhelmed and you tend to forget these things, it can be a lot because in some situations I would forget to submit it on time, so I would not get accommodations. So definitely if you get the exam date, submit it right then and there. And lastly, I would say college professors do not have as much time as high school teachers to understand the way your diabetes works and how to feel the way you do. But in most cases, they're still very understanding.
That's a great point, Nazine. College professors have a different kind of workload. They may be researching, there may be TAs involved, they may have big assembly type classes, they may, be adjunct and do different things. So following up your official accommodations request with that communication to support yourself is a really, really great point. Belle, what about you?
So here's the thing. It's been like 6 years since I was in high school, 3 years at community
Fair.
college and 3 years at OSU. So I do my best to kind of remember things. You can actually kind of hit on a little bit what I wanted to say, Diane. So I guess I'll tackle the housing accommodations a little bit. One thing I remember from my accommodations, like registration experience, is that I had to register with the main accessibility services office first before going to housing, which makes sense, except for that the housing sort of open enrollment for the housing locations opens in February, long before they accepted documentation. So that was a little difficult. My also housing experience is very unique, given the fact that I do use a mobility aid. So I had to have a place that had an automatic door and a ramp. There are varying levels of housing locations on campus that have different amenities. The ones that I eventually chose and I'm still in is the most expensive option, the on-campus apartments. They have the private kitchens, whereas the other options do not have their own private personal kitchens. They have more shared kitchen space. Turns out there's literally only one location that matched both my physical disability needs and my diabetes needs. It was in family graduate student housing, so it's a year-round contract. I've been in the same location since I started OSU. So I definitely not quite exactly on diabetes, but because I have multiple disabilities, I have different, sometimes competing needs, you could say. But I'm just happy that there was at least one location that met everything.
Absolutely. And it's, you know, it's an example, Belle, of like you doing your homework. We're getting ready to talk in a second about self-advocating and being an advocate, and really being clear about what it is you need. So thank you for that perspective. Ella, you messaged me to hop back to you. I know you said you had something else to add. Go for it.
Yes, I completely forgot, and my mom actually just reminded me. But my freshman and sophomore year, I had an accommodation that even though at my school freshmen and sophomores had to park off campus, I was allowed to park on campus, just in case like an infusion set pulled out and I needed to rush home, or I had to go to an endo appointment or something. So I had my car on campus, which was very helpful, especially if I had bad blood sugars. I had extra supplies in my car. I also could get home easier because I lived off campus, and didn't have to worry about bad blood sugars.
That's
making
great.
it so I could not get home.
That's fantastic. And I'm actually going to admit, I will share here. I've been sharing some like links to some things that we have on the resource hub in the chat. I'm getting ready to share one of the documents that we have about some sample accommodations. Although we don't have that on there. So that would be a great recommendation. And this is what
Would
we
recommend
like
that one.
That's why stuff like this is so important to like hear from real lived experiences. Because we're all learning from each other all the time.
And sorry, one
yeah,
more
go ahead.
thing. Belle, I know that you mentioned that your housing costs extra. Some schools, I know Wake does it, having accommodations for housing means that you get charged the standard double rate, even if you are being put into a single or a nicer housing place. So it's just important to like check with your school's terms and don't let that possibility discourage you, because that's not always the case. I know Wake doesn't work that way. I get charged for the standard double rate, even though I'm living in a campus-owned townhouse in a single off of campus.
Yeah, I didn't know about that either. With my interest in like disability and higher education, I've just kind of learned that this past like summer last year. I've been paying the normal $4,000 rate every semester, and I never knew that. I don't know if that could apply to my situation, but that is a very important thing to point out, Ella.
I love that. And again, it goes back to each school is different. You know, everybody, you know, that there is the ADA protects an accommodation, reasonable accommodations, but like don't hesitate to like dig in and question and say like, hey, would this be available here? In the interest of time, just to our panelists, I'm actually probably one of the talking points was to like talk about an additional examples of accommodations. I feel like you guys are kind of already organically answering those and some of the other questions. I am going to share in the chat. I keep linking things back to our resource hub. This is my opportunity to plug the Diabetes Link resource hub that covers a lot of topics for young adults, but there's a ton of stuff about off to college. We actually have an infographic in there that has some examples of accommodations. So I would recommend for our audience to pin that, bookmark it, save it, go back and reference it. I think there was a question about like what types of housing accommodations might be useful. So there's some recommendations in there. And I do want to ask you guys on the panel, like I am going to try to just keep us moving along so we can get to everything. But is there any specific, like a most important, most useful to you accommodation request that you would like highly recommend? I know we've already got some of those mentioned, like, you know, early registration, but like a real life example of an accommodation you made and that helped you or what you wish you had. Go for it, Belle.
One that's definitely a major staple for diabetes is rescheduling exam or quiz due to blood sugar incident or disability related incident. I've had an instance where I had 275 blood sugar the morning I was going to take an exam. So I had to reschedule that for the next day. I emailed my professor immediately after checking my blood sugar saying, oh crap, this is too high. I should not be doing this right now. And thankfully it was an online exam. So she was very understanding and kept the window open an extra day.
That's great. Anybody else? I'm kind of going rogue and not in order on this one, but any other like hot take accommodations that you want to make sure you throw out there?
I think this is a pretty standard accommodation, but the flexible attendance accommodation, not just because your blood sugars are actively bad because they could have just been bad and are recovering, and you have the symptoms. You still have a bad headache from a high blood sugar. You're still a little loopy and shaky from a low blood sugar. So the flexible attendance is really great. And also just talking with your professors and making sure that they are aware beyond just what your accommodations state, like what diabetes means and why it's important to have those accommodations, makes it really helpful for them to be super understanding and kind of more lenient.
I love that. That's another great like nuance. And we actually have some questions coming up in the chat about like types, housing accommodations, or communicating. I just want to say, everyone keep dropping your questions in the chat. And if we aren't answering it, like as we continue talking, we'll be sure and loop back to them all at the end, and I'll just read them out and shout them out to our panel. But definitely some great thoughts that are brewing, I can see. Okay. One of the things that I want to talk about, and this is actually relates to one of these questions that we're getting about talking to your professors, what is the student's role? What do you need to do? What is the accommodations office, or the Office of Disability Services and your accommodations paperwork do for you? But, from our lens, learning to self-advocate, essentially. Like, congratulations, you've got all your paperwork in order, you've checked everything off, you finalized your official accommodations, but now the step of applying those and advocating for yourself in your day-to-day life on campus is something else. So I'm going to ask each of you to talk a little bit about how you learn to self-advocate for those accommodations. And that could mean, from any of you, talking to professors or TAs, maybe communicating with roommates. If you're, have new roommates, when you met them, how you chose to talk to them about having diabetes. I think that's a really important piece. I know I, as a parent, have a lot of questions about that for a young adult. So let's talk a little bit about self-advocacy. And Jenna, we're going to go in order this time. So Jenna, if you'll kick us off.
Sure. So I didn't have roommates in college. But I think that the way I handled it is the first thing every semester in all of my classes, I talked to the professor, and I gave them my accommodations. There was a form they needed to sign to, agree that we had met and spoken about it. And really, you're protected, because diabetes is recognized as a disability. We are protected in, all the ways we need to be able to take care of ourselves. So I think it's just a really great opportunity to, push yourself, and or I found it to be a great opportunity to push myself and say, am I taking care of myself to the best of my ability right now? And if I'm not, what do I need to ask for? And then, actually taking the steps to ask for what I need. Usually though, the accommodations really did it, and it would just be that one conversation, and that was it. It was always a very straightforward process and completely positive experience for me. I'm really grateful for that. I know not everybody has completely positive experiences, but that was mine. I mean, I found my professors to be very respectful. It did take time for me to become more confident about talking about it to professors, but that's just something that you'll grow with time. So yeah, I think just push yourself to do what you need to do to take care of your health. And, over time, you'll start to become more and more confident taking those steps.
I love that framing, both like to push yourself a little bit, and also to give yourself some grace that it will take time. These are muscles and skills that you're building and learning, just like a lot of other things that are happening when you make that college transition, or, part of your journey to like independence. So I think that's like a great dual perspective, Jenna, of like, push yourself when you need to, and also remember that it's going to take time, and that's okay. Like, you don't have to have it all figured out right away. Ella, what about you? Self-advocacy. I mean, obviously in your role at Wake Forest, you're a great advocate of incoming students and other young adults, but how does learning to be that kind of advocate, how did that happen for you?
Like I mentioned in high school, I did not have accommodations. I forgot to mention this, I've been a diabetic for almost 11 years, so I've never had accommodations written down. It was just sort of every start of the new year, I would go, I'd talk to my teachers and I'd explain what diabetes was and kind of lay out what I thought was reasonable. And then it was a discussion back and forth between my professors and I. So coming into Wake, I had these, or not professors, teachers, coming into Wake, I had these skills already. So what I do now every year is, or every semester is, there's a website for my disabilities hub. I go in and it sends every semester automatically sends the list of my discussions to my professors. After that's done, I then individually email each of my professors. I do this not only for diabetes, but also because having a service dog, I want to just make sure that they're well aware ahead of time. And it is actually rather funny because I can tell which professors did not check their email and get my email because my service dog likes to snore in class and I get there well before the professor does because I want to make sure I get a spot where I can tuck her away. So there have been times when she starts snoring and the professor's like, sorry. But yeah, email the professor before the classes start, and then I stay after on the first day of classes or the second day because everybody wants to see the professor on the first day, and kind of go over my list of accommodations. So just making sure that you're well aware of what your accommodations list, but also not going into it of being like, this is what has to happen and you have to do this. Like they do have to do this, but you don't have to be coming off right away as confrontational, just trying to make it seem more of like a natural conversation than you have to do this, sorry, bye, nice to meet you.
I think that's great. And I kind of love that your service dog is a beta test if someone actually read your emails or not, because we all know that as well. And that's a great point. That's one of the reasons to communicate and self-advocate, right? Because the disability office may share your accommodations. The official paperwork may have been filed and your professor may have received the notice that they are supposed to get. And you may still need to point it out to them, be like, hey, that email you got, that's me. I'm a real person. And this is what this means. And this is how, these are the supports that I need. So it's a great reminder.
They get a ton of emails in the lead up with accommodations. So it's very easy for yours to get lost. So just introducing yourself is the way to do it.
Absolutely. Nazine, what about you?
So with professors, just know that they've had many students like yourself in the past, so there should not be much stress. And to answer one of the questions in the chat, you do not necessarily have to meet the professor, but I heavily recommend it. For my school, everything is mainly digital, so we ask the office to send them the request, and if they don't get back, then you should meet with them, but typically they do. And I think that with my introductions, I didn't even have to go through the accommodations just because it was really set in stone. It was a checkbox and they look at it, they're like, okay, cool. But when I talk with them, I mentioned that these blood sugar abnormalities cannot always be expected and that it is sometimes out of my control. So for things that require extensions for assignments or rescheduling, they do have rules that say, okay, let me know 24 hours beforehand, but with diabetes, you don't know 24 hours what's going to happen. So allow them to understand a little bit. But yeah, TAs have been the easiest for me. They know it's hard to be a student as is. So I've never had a problem with that. For roommates and friends, I would say ease into it. Kind of know who they are before you tell them. I had a freshman year roommate and it definitely took her a while to adjust. And that is because I didn't know she had a phobia of needles. So mention it, of course, but just make sure they're prepared in some way, but overall people will support you. And if you're nervous or hesitant, don't be.
That's great advice. Knowing your audience as well too, advocating for what you need and also knowing like what will land and, where and who to connect with is great. Belle, what about you?
So one thing I want to note is that basically advocacy skills are not like suddenly bestowed upon you when you register for accommodations.
Yep.
There's something you build over time and often through trial and error. One thing that I've learned to do is basically send like an introduction email to all my professors. I actually did that this morning because it's about 3 weeks for the semester starting, about that time frame. I think it's okay to at least send things out and try to start that conversation. I'm fairly open with my disabilities. Other people may not be, and that is perfectly okay. The only thing that professors are required to have is the accommodation letter, if you choose for accommodations. Anything you decide to share with them is extra. I do go over kind of some of my disabilities, some things that I generally need that may not be exactly listed like in my accommodations, but will help with the conversation. Regardless of how comfortable you feel of disclosing, there are 2 things that I always would say is a really good idea with that kind of introduction email or that introduction conversation. Request a syllabus and request a meeting. I use the syllabus for the class kind of as my guideline of what to expect for the course, and actually build out like a agenda type meeting agenda, not only based on my accommodations, what I know I need, but also on what the professor will be doing and what they expect. And so we can actually have a productive conversation in our accommodation meeting. And it's not just me saying, hey, these are my accommodations. How are we going to do this without any other understanding of how they do their course? So yeah, those are definitely the 2 things I would say, regardless of how comfortable you feel with self-disclosure or anything. Definitely ask for a syllabus and request a meeting.
That's a great recommendation, Belle. I really appreciate that. And not something that I personally have heard like spoken of before. But absolutely like that, requesting a syllabus and saying, hey, here's what I need, but also paying attention to like, how does this professor work? Maybe how does this other professor work? And what's gonna, set you up for success for sure. Okay, we are getting very close to time, and I want to make sure we have an opportunity for some questions to come in. So I'm going to ask the 4 of you to keep a brief response to this. And this, the idea of the power of peer support, and in any final advice. And here at the Diabetes Link, we talk a lot about peer support. I can answer questions or emails afterwards about our college chapters and those communities. And, in addition to setting up something like accommodations, finding your community, finding your network, and people that get you, see you, and are experiencing what you're experiencing, as we all know, in any aspect of life is very valuable. So just if you guys have like a quick shout out to how to peer support in your community, like ease your college journey or give you that confidence, help you flex those self-advocacy muscles. What would you recommend outside of accommodations to someone coming into college? Peer support, find your community. That was like helpful as well. And we'll quickly go in order. Jenna.
So I actually, when I started college, I didn't know anyone there with type 1, and I didn't have a big type 1 community when I was in high school. And that actually prompted me to start the chapter at the University of Maryland. So that's one thing you could do. You could start a chapter to build a community. You can check if there's already a chapter at your school. The other thing I did is I got involved in a diabetes camp, not as a camper. I'm a little too old for that now, but as a counselor, which was super fulfilling and fun. So there are a lot of diabetes camps. And if your school doesn't have a chapter and you don't feel like creating one, you could always go that route too. So those are the 2 main areas where I found a lot of peer support with type 1. And it's been really fulfilling and great. It's always awesome to connect to other type 1s.
Those are great recommendations for sure. And 2 of the ones we hear the most for sure. Diabetes camp and, college clubs. Ella, what about you?
Yeah, kind of the same answer. Working with the Diabetes Link has been a great spot for peer support, but I know that at least at my school, there are like some more general clubs that deal with like having disabilities on campus. If your school doesn't have a TDL chapter, you can look at other clubs that do a similar thing. I also didn't have really any diabetic friends going into college, and I was like, I didn't have it in high school. I don't need it now. But it is a lot different when you go to college because you're now away from whoever might be your primary caregiver, guardian, parent, and friends that have known you for a while, and you're trying to invent yourself as a new person. But that makes it, having diabetes can make it a little more difficult, and finding people to talk to that you might not have needed before, but are very helpful now can be really great. So don't just think that just because you haven't had a support group of diabetics before doesn't mean you won't need it later.
That's great. So true. Nazine, what about yourself?
I've personally found some of my best friends through diabetes, so it might be minor, but when you see people with a Dexcom or an Omnipod, say hi. You know, I think it's a great way to start a conversation. And similarly, I did not have a diabetes link in my school my freshman year. It's quite new, so this is our official first year. So I haven't met too many people, but just casual. Hi, I like your Dexcom. Like then you start talking, get the numbers. So it's very easy, and it creates a sense of belonging. So you feel more connected to the school. But in terms of advice to high school students or parents, this is also minor, but I would go to the accommodations office in person. Now, at first, it was really daunting for me thinking about the rules and regulations, but as soon as you step foot in the office, you realize the office is full of people who just care about you and others and want the process to glide by as fast as possible. So, yeah.
That's a great recommendation. Always showing up and like being a person is impactful for sure. Belle, what about you? I mean, obviously you opened and shared with us, you know, that you had started a club, you know, outside the Diabetes Link organization, which is great. But how has peer support, building that group, or just kind of finding your community been impactful for you?
So for me, it's definitely been a long time coming, just because we don't have a chapter here on the OSU campus or even the entire state. So I did not know, I still don't really know a lot of people with type 1, but getting together with a lot of other students and just try to find people wherever I can. A lot of it has come from my own like personal advocacy efforts across campus. It's definitely been an interesting experience, and we're not official yet, so that's still something we're trying to get through. But I don't share like a single disability with anybody in my student group. Disability Justice Initiative is what our name is, but that doesn't stop us from being able to understand each other's experiences. I think there's at least a couple other people with chronic medical conditions, so we understand like when it comes to chronic conditions, flare-ups. I think there's at least 1 or 2 other people that use a mobility aid. So whenever there are issues of like getting to buildings or sidewalk issues, I understand that because I also use a mobility aid. So even though this is a Diabetes Link is a diabetes focused organization, I think we have to also acknowledge the intersectionality and just find a community with similar people and not just focus just on diabetes. There's a lot more commonality than I think most people think is there.
I love that. And kudos for getting that started and off the ground. I can't wait to, you know, hear and see how that takes off.
Hopefully this fall semester, because this is my final undergraduate year.
Absolutely. We're at time, so I'm gonna acknowledge that if anyone of our audience has to jump off, we certainly understand. We are recording this and we'll send it to you by email tomorrow. Panelists, give me a thumbs up if you're okay to hang out for like 5 more minutes and do a couple of chat questions. Does that work? For the most part? Okay, that'd be great. And if not, and if you need to jump off, that's absolutely okay as well. I just scrolling through, I just want to voice a couple of these, you know. One of the questions we got earlier on was what type of housing accommodations, some examples of housing accommodations that are useful. I can share some of the ones that we have on our guide, like on our sample, you know, an appropriate number of outlets to plug in all of the devices, space, you know, mini fridge space, maybe possibly an additional mini fridge. Some people I know request that for separate, to keep your insulin separate from like the shared space with your roommates. Just space to store diabetes supplies. Maybe it's being in a dorm or in a suite kind of style space that has access to a kitchen so that you can prepare food and things that meet your needs. I know one of the other questions I'm connecting this to later down, one of the other questions was about if any of you have celiac and accommodations around that. So are there any other, from the four of you, specific housing or dining accommodations that you'd want to shout out or highlight, recommend?
For me, this one isn't very formal, but I was able to get the building I wanted that's closer to the cafeteria. And just because, you know, if I was low, I'd be able to get food more accessibly, but it's all about communication. So I'd give it a shot.
Great one.
I myself don't have celiac, but I live with two people that do have celiac. And both of their accommodations were access to a kitchen, a private kitchen that's not shared with anybody outside of the roommate group, just so that they knew the people that were going to be preparing food in there and were able to prepare their own food, as well as one that I have forgotten, but I will remember at some point, hopefully. And then I have service dog specific housing accommodations, since my dog is a medical alert scent detection dog, for scenting blood sugars. I don't have any in-room roommates. We live in a suite setting, and I have access to a bathroom that has a private lock so that I can bring her into the bathroom if I'm showering, which is when I tend to drop low and don't have my devices on me to see that. So I have access to a private bathroom that locks from the inside and doesn't have like a stall space. It's just, you know what I'm talking about, just a private bathroom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your service dog can come with you. But I mean, that's brilliant. That's a, you know, I know at least in our college tours with our student, non-diabetic student here, like checking out the bathrooms is a thing for sure. So that's super important. Ella, I'm also going to acknowledge one of the questions in the chat were just asking a little bit more about housing accommodations for service dogs and how it works. And I know you answered some of that, but I might encourage that poster. Ella, I know you shared your email address in there to reach out to you directly. You know, it, like everything is kind of college dependent specific or circumstance dependent based on, but I'm happy to connect you with other people. And I know Ella, you're happy to chat about that more as well.
Yeah, definitely happy to talk more about it via email.
Fantastic. I'm looking to see, let's see what else. Just kind of scrolling through as we're starting to wrap up here. Oh, I love you guys for sharing your emails. That's fantastic. We have a comment, some recommendations about a portable air conditioner or an air conditioned dorm, or a room on a lower floor, so you don't have to like wait for the elevator and go high up. Those are some possible accommodations people have requested. I've heard that with some success. Some people do, some people don't. You know, different schools are different. This question just came in, and this is going to be the last one we're going to do before we close out. Do we have recommendations for talking to your roommates specifically? I know we kind of touched on it. I'm going to drop a link in the chat from our resource hub, yet another link. But if any of the four of you have like a quick, I know Nazine, you spoke on it specifically, but if anybody else wants to just mention like talking to roommates or friends, how did you broach that? That would be great.
Yeah, so I did not have any like roommate besides the service dog. My freshman year, no random assignment. So when it came to my sophomore year, I was in a random assignment dorm, but I was in my own room. So in that situation, I reached out to my roommates ahead of time before we even roomed together, letting them know in case they wanted to switch into a different random assignment. Not only just because of diabetes, but the service dog. Not everybody wants to live with a dog, and people are allergic. And so then once we were all set in stone, they were fine with living with a dog. One of the first nights I kind of talked to them about like how to use a glucagon if something were to happen. Like like, do you call the ambulance? Yes. And just kind of a basic checklist, and also asked if any of them would be comfortable with sharing their number with my parents in case for some reason my parents have my blood sugars. If they were really, really low and I wasn't responding, they could reach out to them if they felt comfortable with that. All of them said yes. But also, like, that's not their job. So just like making sure that your roommates around you are comfortable if it's a random assignment. And then if it's like, you can select the people, just ask your friends and don't just assume that they're fine with it. Because not everybody wants the added pressure of living with a type 1 diabetic. It's, you know, sucky, but it's true. Like, it's kind of a lot of responsibility to put on your friends if something were to happen to you, and to ask them to like know how to use a glucagon, know how to like make sure, like if you call an ambulance, to make sure that they know that you have an insulin pump and are a type 1 diabetic, and like a couple of different things.
Absolutely. I think that's those are some great comments, Ella. I did share a couple of other links because that's what I've been doing while you guys are talking in the chat about how to talk with a roommate, another student perspective, just some suggestions and you know, guides to talking and having those conversations. I'm going to give you all a little like early insight that over on our resource hub, we are developing new topics at a really fast clip. And one of our next topics that we're going to be releasing is about relationships and diabetes. And a lot of that is roommates, as well as romantic relationships, as well as parent relationships. So keep an eye out on our socials and on our resource hub for that stuff to come out. Thank you, Nazine, for putting that in the chat, inviting them to it. The diabetes link chapter, that's a great point. It is not restricted to people who have diabetes. It can be people who have loved ones or supporting, you know, anyone that is interested in. But at that point, I am going to wrap us up.
I do have one last thing I'd like to mention.
Okay, Beth.
It's not diabetes related or disability related, but there is one resource that I kind of like to show that OSU has, and maybe see if your university has, and if not, maybe advocate for it when it comes to dining. Because I do live in an apartment style location, I have my private kitchen, so I don't really use the dining halls as much. But OSU does have a fairly robust nutrition sort of plan. They can look at the different dining locations. It shows not only nutritional information, but also allergies. It does not have every location on campus, because there are certain like in academic building locations that are not on this list, but the main dining locations are on that link. And even though I haven't really used a lot, I think it is fairly robust and very informative if you do go to a dining hall to have something like this, so you're not guesstimating a whole lot.
No, that's a great shout out, Bill. I appreciate that. And I do believe most universities have something along these lines to be able to provide for various allergies and, you know, nutrition needs. But asking for something like this and what is available to you is a great self-advocacy step to practice for sure. Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you for our guests for allowing us to take a little bit of extra of your time. Thank you so much to the four of you, our panel, for sharing openly about your experiences and, you know, just taking us on your journey. I just need to say a couple of like housekeeping things before we close out. You know, we want to acknowledge at the diabetes link that every student is unique. Every diabetes journey is unique. Every college experience is unique. We do want to, and I want to point out a couple of resources to you. I've been dropping links all night to our resource hub. Our resource hub is our online kind of warehouse of anything and everything you could look at and have conversations about or be curious about related to diabetes as a young adult. Things like partying, things like relationships. Off to college is its own topic. Parents and caregivers, we have a section just for you. That's like just how to help support parents and caregivers in supporting your young adults. So check that out. Definitely check out the resource hub and play around in there. We will send out this recording tomorrow and we'll post this on the hub. And then my only other 2 shout outs for parents that you've heard me talk about the Facebook group. If you're interested in like an online community, and it's a really robust group where parents talk to each other and make suggestions. And what do you do if you're worried about your kid waking up in the middle, not waking up to alarms in the middle of the night? That's a great place. Come find us. It's called Parents and Caregivers of College Students. And I think it says hosted by the Diabetes Link. I'm in there, so come say hi to me. I dropped my email in. If anyone wants to email me, and thank you to our panelists for sharing yours. And young adults, the only other thing I want to say is, if you're starting this process, start a chapter, join a chapter. If there is one, check it out. If there isn't one, we'll help you start one. It's not super hard at all. There's some great incentives. You've got support from the rest of my team, who are your one-on-one contact. We offer stipends to help you get some things off the ground and have some activities. So I dropped that email in as well. If you just want to say, hey, I'm looking at these schools, is there a chapter here? Could you connect me to a student there? Reach out to us. Our chapter team would be happy to connect with you. Follow us. We're in all the obvious places: Facebook, Instagram, Discord, TikTok, all of it. And the last thing I do need to say is that we do have some sponsors of our Off to College programming, and that I want to thank them. That would be Dexcom, Lilly, Novo Nordisk, Viatris. They all sponsor a lot of our Off to College work and enable us to host these events and bring all of these awesome resources to you free of charge. That's it. I feel free to email me if there are any follow-up questions. Thank you all so very much, and best of luck on your journey. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.